So that sort of goes into your other fascination that I've read about, which is beauty and like aesthetics for males and females, right? So,
Sure.
which do you think came first? Is it that the visual system evolves for other reasons and then it becomes highly attuned to beautiful things, or is it that you sort of get this runaway where desiring beautiful things leads to a more and more intense visual system? Which one comes first?
Well, we really have great data. It turns out that the visual system comes way before.
Okay.
And in terms this four color visual system, RGB, UV that birds have, evolved in bony fishes. It's part of our inner fish. It happened in the water. Actually, a huge amount of the innovations in vision usually occur in the water, whether you're a scallop or a vertebrate, right? The water seems to be this place where vision gets really important and a lot of innovations happen. So then when vertebrates came onto the land, they had this really cooking visual system, which they kept. And it became really good for ecology for all sorts of reasons. And if you're not a nocturnal lineage, and you're a vertebrate, you have a pretty good vision. But then this bottleneck occurred in mammals where our visual system got really bad, but then was cobbled together in a new way in old world monkeys. Our old world monkey ancestors had an innovation that gave us restored at least trichromatic vision to us. But it's kind of it's a bad version compared to what birds have. Another innovation in terms of these oil droplet filters, they have special filters in their retinas that allow them to resolve colors much better. This happened in an ancestor probably of turtles and birds and crocodiles back in an early Archosaurs plus turtles group. So could have happened in the water as well. But so bird vision came first. And then with all the social opportunity and social complexity, then all sorts of opportunity for display and other forms of beauty evolved.
Okay, so how far back does that go then? These beauty displays.
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, the two kinds of selection that can give rise to beautiful ornaments are just social selection, right? Who do you hang out with, right? And why, right? And those kind of social choices give rise to ornaments that can be monogamous. Like a lot of parrots have bright colors, right? But they're monogamous and they're monomorphic. That is, males and females look the same, right? But there are also opportunities for sexual selection or mate choice, and these kind of choices give rise to really a dramatic ornament, like we see in birds of paradise or the peacock's tail and all this kind of thing.
Is it also that you need sort of a certain complexity of like brain processing power for beauty?
Well, what you really need is, sensory biology. You need to be able to sense it. You need at least enough cognitive power to evaluate your choices. And then you need the capacity, either social or cognitive, to make a choice. So we usually think of these things as pretty advanced features. But I would argue that bees are making choices when they forage on flowers. One reason why flowers are beautiful is because every flower is trying to be memorably rewarding to the bee, right? It's like if you look at a Coke can, there's nothing on the outside that tells you anything about what's inside, right? It's only an abstract symbol that's trying to remind you of the experience of the last time you had it, right? Well, flowers are like that too. To a flower or to a bee, a flower has architecture, right? And it's like it's a whole, you're inside of it, right? And it's got this incredible, overpowering odor and all this food, and so the flower is trying to be memorably rewarding. If the flower was just sort of efficiently pushing the bee's buttons and saying, "Okay, forage at me," then all flowers would converge and look the same. But of course, that doesn't help the flower. The flower wants to take its pollen to another individual of the same species, right? So flowers are beautiful because bees are making choices. So that either means that it doesn't take a lot of cognitive power, or we're really underestimating the cognitive ability of bees. And I think it might be the latter. I mean, recently there was this great example where they gave a reward to a bumblebee when he rolled a marble into a hole within a sort of a large chessboard, and so it was like soccer, like the bumblebees playing soccer basically, and they were really really good at it. Right? And it was like a cognitive task in there. So we've gone far from birds, but here you go.
But it is fascinating, and I think that is it something? I wonder if it's something about social species that tend to also develop these, because you see, in humans and birds and bees, it tends to be the ones that sort of like there's a communal processing ability maybe that aids in that.
Absolutely. As soon as you have social relationships, then you have the opportunity for social choices and some criteria on which you make those choices, which are always going to be something you perceive, right? And that's what's one of the interesting about sex is that it always provides the opportunity. Well, it's both a competitive and a collaborative or cooperative venture. Every organism is automatically right at the beginning having its fitness by being sexual. So, because you're only going to be donating half of your genes to the next generation, so that means you really got to cooperate, right? And yet there's also competitive elements, right? And so as a result, this sexual choice is this fundamental opportunity that gives rise to a lot of ornament in nature.
Can you talk a little bit about, because I wanted to put this in the song that I'm putting out, but I totally didn't have the space, and also it's a very visual thing, so we'll see if you can explain it. But the evolution of feathers is something that is very hard to visualize and figure out how this very complicated structure comes out of a scale or a hair or anything like that. Do you have a good way that you like to explain that?
Well, I can only set up the problem.
Okay.
And the problem is the following. Feathers are branched like a tree, right? But they grow from their base like a hair. So if you look at your hair, the tip of your hair is the oldest part, and the base of the hair is the youngest, right? Right. But you look at a tree, and the youngest part is the tips of the branches.
Huh.
Right, and the branches are formed by the meristem branching, bifurcating at the tip or at some joint, right?
Yeah.
And so what that means is that in a feather, the branches are older than the nodes and their interconnections, right? And so that's the big conundrum. So how does a feather do that?
Right.
Well, the real answer is that it's one of these miraculously great, awesome things about vertebrate biology. It happens to be done in a tube, and so feathers are like ziti pasta, being extruded by the skin, right? Tube of epidermis with dermis in the middle, right? And basically you orchestrate growth in that tube to create this pattern of differentiated branches fusing at the end. And besides that, you definitely got to go to visuals.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'll try to link in the description to your lecture, because you had a great visual for that.
We have a great little animation that I can send you.
Mm-hmm. But I also definitely found it a challenge to try to explain that animation in any form of lyrics as well. So it ended up being left out. The other thing that I found really fascinating when I was researching bird evolution, and this was the whole notion of pedomorphosis is new to me. This idea that a creature is it's a four-dimensional creature as opposed to a three-dimensional creature, and you can get a lot of diversity just by moving around the pieces in time, sort of like taking adult features and mixing them with baby features. Could you?
Indeed, the work on the evolution of feathers is really a great example of an exciting field of evo-devo, or evolution and development, and this area really focuses not just on genetic variations that become successful in a population, but on the additional fact that every organism that has a morphology has to grow into that shape. It has to grow itself, right? And this process creates all kinds of barriers to the possible. So mutation is random with respect to need, but the mutations that are right are not random with respect to the organism. There's lots of things that you just can't do, you know. And so if you build a body that has, you know, a limbs with one bone, a pair of bones, and then a lot of bones, right? That means that any kind of variation in limb morphology is going to be based on this certain constraint, this certain history. And the body is filled with these kind of features. And we're learning a lot about both the genes that are involved in the development of the organism, and in the process it gives rise to innovation. So a lot of times when you have innovations, totally new stuff, it comes as a result of a new way to circumvent or evade the constraints placed by development itself, right? And so what bird feathers did was invent the tube. Once you got a tube of epidermis growing out of the skin, then you have a whole set of new opportunities for innovation. And it's actually a lot like once animals, you know, if you look at a jellyfish, it's basically a bag, right? It's got only one opening. It's going like this. But as soon as you get the tubular organism with a mouth and an anus and a top and a bottom and a left and a right and a front and an end, you know, you get an explosion in animal diversity, right? So as soon as you create something as complicated as a tube, you could do different things on your top and your bottom and all around and in and out, and you have just dimensions of anatomy to work with. And that's what feathers did. So feathers made the tube, and then kaboom, you get this most complicated thing that grows out of the skin of any animal. It's really about the way in which development itself creates biases in how evolution can proceed and gives rise to, you know, the diversity we see around us.
Right. So it opens you up to this entirely new sort of set of parameter space that you can fill then.
It shows something about the limitation of the population genetic popular 20th century synthesis in evolutionary biology. Made a huge amount of progress, but it's still incomplete. And so there are lots of areas of biology are trying to fill in those gaps currently.
So what are you working on now? Like what's that question that's driving you forward now that you want to get the answer to?
Well, since about 2005, I've been working in collaborations on duck sex, which is a topic that I never thought I would get into. But it turns out that duck sex, a lot of duck sex is, you know, normal. Vanilla in the bird world, you know, it's a pair. The male goes quack, quack, quack and has the green head. The female chooses the male. But then in many species of duck, there's also a lot of sexual violence, sexual coercion, right? And forced copulation. And this, duck sex has this, violent aspect to it. But what we've realized or discovered with Patty Brennan now at Mount Holyoke College and collaborators is that freedom of choice matters to animals. And I mean that, you know, sexual autonomy, the idea that there is some special aspect of getting what you want and not being coerced actually matters to animals and evolves. So this is kind of like a feminist discovery in the heart of evolutionary biology that comes out of ornithology, and totally unexpected to me personally. And so one of the things we're doing now is working on mathematical population genetic theory to demonstrate that this is plausible. So my student Sam Snow and other collaborators are doing explicit math models to demonstrate that this process is possible.
So how does freedom of
the whole big thing we could go to also needs pictures.
I suppose so. So what's that mechanism then? Like how does freedom of choice come to be evolutionarily favorable?
Okay, so if a female gets the mate she prefers, then her offspring inherit the green head and the quack, quack, quack that she likes, and that other females have also evolved to prefer.
Okay.
Because there's a kind of this normative desire that will coalesce within a bird species. So if she's forcibly fertilized fertilized by forced copulation or by sexual violence, then her offspring will either inherit a random set of ornaments that she hasn't preferred, or a set of ornaments that she has actually rejected. And that means that her offspring will not be as sexually attractive as they would have been had she gotten her choice.
Right.
What that means is that any kind of behavior, or in the duck sex example, vaginal morphology, that allows them to assert their desires will actually evolve. So what happens in ducks is that the males still have a penis. Most birds have lost theirs, but it's homologous with the mammalian penis. And these birds have still have this structure, and they can force copulations using it. But what happens in females is that they've evolved or co-evolved vaginal morphologies that prevent intromission or fertilization during forced copulation. So it's literally an anti-screw device, because the male penis is counterclockwise coiled, and the female vagina is clockwise coiled. So it's like a chiral mismatch that comes only in limericks and ducks, and so that mismatch, how does that evolve? Well, vaginal morphologies that allow females to maintain their choices give them the direct benefits of having sons that other females will like, and so it's the normative desires, the fact that females as a group, in solidarity, agree on what is attractive, that allows them to leverage their autonomy, to advance their autonomy in the face of sexual violence. So these ducks are 98% successful at preventing fertilization by forced copulation, even when forced copulations are 40 to 50% of the actual sexual behavior in the wild. So that's like an FDA approvable birth control method, right? And they have evolved. And the question is how. And so we're working. We've done a lot of work on the anatomy and the evolution, and now we're doing work on the population genetic theory to demonstrate that this model I articulated can actually result in the evolution of new methods, new mechanisms of to resist sexual violence. So that's pretty radical. You're just a bird watcher. You go through life, and all of a sudden you're on a direct connection between feminism and evolutionary biology. These are fields that are mostly antagonistic for a lot of reasons, because evolutionary biologists have, I think they've been shoveling a lot of BS about in the form of evolutionary psychology theories about the adaptation of human behavior.
Right. I think that feels like a great example of how hard it is to figure out. Like I'm trying to imagine what happens in, say, 10 million years. Suppose that ducks evolve a higher brain function and start analyzing themselves and trying to figure out, like, why are we built this way? What kind of designer designed this specific morphology for us that literally prevents us from, mating properly? And you would have to go back to these very specific things about your genetics and your environment 10 million years ago to figure it out. And
one thing that happens is not all ducks do it. And basically what happens is when you have a high concentration of resources, lots of social opportunity, then it's more likely to happen. But a swan or a goose tends to be very rare. Wood duck, very rare. Harlequin duck, rare. Puddle ducks that you see in the city park, very common.
Are there other social dynamics things among birds that you think can be more or less applied to people?
Well, yeah, and one of the things. Well, the issue of course, applying any of this to people requires a lot of caveats and a lot of what is it about people, that we're talking about? Because people have an incredible social complexity and cultural complexity that is either absent or a lot simpler in birds. Mm-hmm. But another thing that we're really interested in is another example of sexual autonomy is in the bowerbirds. Bowerbirds are these amazing Australian and Papua New Guinean species that build where the female does all the parental care. She builds the nest, lays the eggs, and raises the babies. But she visits males who do these elaborate displays. And the males make a bower, which is not a nest at all. but it's made out of sticks, and it's a display construction. It's kind of like a seduction theater, if you will. And it's made with sticks. Some of them are avenues, right, with a little passageway, and some of them are look like a tree, like a Charlie Brown Christmas tree, with a sort of a ramp around the base, right? And so there's a large literature on them, and we're interested in studying how they evolve. And one of the ways they apparently do evolve is that the bower evolves from female preference. The males who make the most attractive bowers get the most mates. So it's really the females are agents in the evolution of the bower. And the bower is clearly aesthetic. It has a lot of beautiful elements, and they collect materials. But the bower also has another function. Imagine the avenue bower. What happens is the female sitting right in the middle, and the male's displaying in the front. Well, if he wants to copulate, he has to go around the back, which gives the female a chance to pop out the front. So the bower is an aesthetic setting for courtship, where the female gets literally inches away from the male, but she also entirely maintains her freedom of choice. She can evade his advances. So she is basically protected from sexual coercion, or the bowerbird equivalent of date rape, right? She can get as close as she wants and still maintain her freedom of choice. And we think that's a different way that autonomy can evolve from, because in the ducks, the penis gets bigger and the vagina gets more complicated, and on and on and on. It keeps going, right? It's kind of an arms race.
Right.
But in the bowerbird, the females take apart male advantage in a way that allows them to get what they want. And what do the females do with all this autonomy? They make choices. And so what happens as a result of this is an explosion of beauty. Bowerbirds have this explosive diversity, all these different structures, all the different stuff they gather. And so it has this other feedback on beauty itself.
So bowerbirds are it's like a date. It's more of a date model. Yeah, it's like you go out to the restaurant and you have a safe place to get really close and hang out and not have to worry about anything, because you're in a safe location.
Right, and but it also speaks to the notion that female or mating preferences are not just about getting what you want. They can also evolve to ensure that you get what you want. Right, and so that's this new theory, a new element in sexual selection that I think is actually quite relevant to human evolution.